2 hours ago, while officials in Washington believed Canada was running out of options, Mark Carney was in Brussels signing a major trade and energy agreement with the European Union. Not a symbolic agreement, not a vague promise, but a binding long-term deal. The White House had expected Canada to return to the negotiating table before the deadline. Instead, Carney built a new table somewhere else. For months, this was developing quietly. Canadian and European officials were meeting away from the spotlight in cities that do not usually attract intense diplomatic attention. What looked like routine visits were actually strategic groundwork. While Washington focused on pressuring Ottawa, Ottawa was building leverage overseas. The United States assumed Canada had limited alternatives because of geography and deep economic ties. That assumption now looks like a miscalculation. The agreement itself is practical and strategic at the same time. Europe needs stable energy supplies after years of instability and political risk in global markets. Canada has energy capacity and political stability. By committing to long-term LNG exports through new Atlantic terminals, Canada positions itself as a reliable supplier without attaching political conditions. For Europe, this reduces exposure not only to Russia, but also to unpredictable trade pressure from the United States. For Canada, it guarantees demand regardless of American tariff threats. The same logic applies to critical minerals. Lithium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements are essential for electric vehicles, defense systems, and advanced technology. Washington largely assumed Canada would remain integrated into the American supply chain by default. Carney has now diversified that chain. By linking Canadian extraction directly with European processing and manufacturing, he reduces Canada's dependency on a single dominant customer. That shift may seem technical, but strategically it changes bargaining power. Defense cooperation is perhaps even more significant. Industrial defense partnerships create long-term alignment. When production facilities, research partnerships, and procurement contracts are shared, countries become economically and strategically intertwined. If Canadian aerospace firms gain easier access to European contracts and European companies invest in production inside Canada, that creates durable relationships that cannot be easily reversed by political tension. The reaction in Washington appeared unsettled. Mixed messaging from different agencies suggests the move caught parts of the administration off guard. Threatening additional tariffs may satisfy political messaging, but economically it carries risk. The United States relies heavily on Canadian crude oil, lumber, potash, and integrated supply chains in autos and manufacturing. Escalation would not be one-sided pain. It would transmit directly to American consumers and industries. In deeply interconnected economies, punishment often rebounds. Carney's public messaging has been careful. He has not framed this as anti-American. Instead, he has framed it as pro-sovereignty and pro-diversification. That distinction matters. By saying that dependency creates vulnerability, he is not attacking the United States. He is reframing Canada's long-term strategy. Diversification is difficult to criticize in principle because it is standard risk management. From a central banker's perspective, concentration risk is dangerous. Carney is applying that logic to geopolitics. Europe's response also reflects its own frustrations. Many European leaders have experienced tariff pressure and trade uncertainty from Washington in recent years. A stronger economic bridge with Canada offers strategic balance. It is not about replacing the United States, but about reducing exposure to unilateral pressure. In that sense, the agreement reflects broader global trends where middle powers seek multiple partnerships instead of singular dependence. Financial markets reacted quickly because markets care less about rhetoric and more about structural change. If Canada secures long-term European demand for energy and minerals, that stabilizes future revenue expectations. If U.S.-Canada trade friction intensifies, American firms exposed to cross-border supply chains face uncertainty. Even modest reductions in growth projections matter when economies are already operating near capacity. Markets are essentially pricing in a shift from assumption to diversification. What makes this moment strategically interesting is not dramatic confrontation, but asymmetry in approach. Traditional trade disputes often escalate through public threats and counter-threats. Carney's strategy appears quieter and longer term. Rather than retaliate directly, he is constructing alternatives. That limits Washington's leverage over time without triggering an immediate economic shock. It is a slower, structural response rather than an emotional one. The White House now faces constrained choices: escalation risks, domestic economic costs; backing down risks, political perception. Negotiation is possible, but Canada's leverage has improved because it now has credible alternatives. The core issue is no longer whether Canada can withstand pressure in the short term, but whether the United States underestimated how quickly partners can realign when pressured. Whether this becomes a permanent shift depends on implementation. Building terminals, supply chains, and defense facilities takes time. Political winds can change. But if even half of the agreement materializes as planned, North Atlantic economic integration deepens in a way that reduces America's centrality in Canada's external strategy. 2 hours earlier, Washington believed the pressure campaign was working. 2 hours later, the strategic landscape looks more complicated. Carney did not confront the United States head-on. He widened the field. And in geopolitics, widening the field often matters more than winning a single round.